everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 17 of Trigun, and yeah, I could not wait. No, I got off work tonight and was like, oh no, we need to watch it right now, right, because we kind of reached this weird point in the story where it's literally like the end of Act 2, it feels like, or the end of Act 3, getting ready to go into the final act of the series, and we've left off where our protagonist Vash has mysteriously disappeared after an explosion that he caused. Wolfwood has re-revealed himself, and he possibly is connected to our group of antagonists and is not afraid to kill said group of antagonists. And then we have Legato, we have Mid-Valley, we have a whole host of villains still yet to be faced, and we still don't even know who Legato's working for, because there's somebody up above Legato in the chain of command that may be the person that Vash is looking for. So yeah, there's been lots of lore dropped, lots of world building, lots of things that have had mysteries and questions kind of built up for us, the audience, that now it's like, okay, well, if you were gonna pick a time to tell us what was happening, now's the time. Because, and I feel bad for Meryl and Millie, because they're kind of thrown in the middle of all this, having to make a decision. Like, do they chase after Vash and risk their lives, or do they keep their jobs and go back to December and just go back to work and not worry about it? I think we know what the answer is going to be. But whether or not this series ends well or not is anybody's guess. It's 26 episodes, and there's a movie. I'm going to watch the movie. And then we obviously will have Trigun Stampede after that. And I know Stampede, all I know, I don't want to know specifics, but all I do know is that it is a little bit different. So it's like an alternative take on it, right? Kind of like Neon Genesis, the manga versus the anime. And I know there is a manga for Trigun, but because it's so hard to get, I would like to get to it eventually, but I'm going to be honest, I'm doing 2 other long-running manga series on my channel right now. I'm about manga'd out for a while. And I know I have Berserk after I'm done with the anime for it, so I'm about continuous manga'd out for a little bit. I may need a break from some manga and get into some more anime after a while, you know? I feel like that may be the case. But when Trigun's manga does come out, I would like to take a look at it, especially because I've heard it's even different as well. So I would like to get to it eventually. It just may be something that comes down the pipe, right? At some point, I'm going to be missing Trigun. I'm going to want to see the manga. We will go through it then. Yes. But yeah, and I'd like to at least wait a little while until there's some manga volumes saved up, so I'm not just like reading a manga and then waiting a year. Because I'm doing that right now with other series, and it's not fun. So yeah, I'm really excited, y'all. I hope you all are too, but I pulled up this episode and I was like, no, I really want to watch Trigun. So a really big quick shout out to our patrons over on Patreon. Thank you all so much for your kindness, your support. I love talking with you all in the Discord. I love talking with you all in the comments. I'm super excited to talk about this manga and this anime, and I'll be excited to talk about the manga when we get to it. But a real quick shout out to the patrons in the philanthropy tier. Thank you all so much for supporting me and going above and beyond. I am humbled. I am grateful. And I really, really appreciate it. So a special shout out to Edgar, to Dana, to Anime Annie, to Tyrone, to Alex Cornejo, to Be Happy, to Kiri, to Kuba Lutek, to Eric, to Sunspots, Translucent Men, to Anna Legatus Goob, as well as Librarian of Lang, Shimoyama, to Nameless Monster, Natalia Saharia, and Modern Amethyst. Thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. So yeah, I'm super excited. I don't know what we've reached a point where we don't know where Vash is, so, and we've been slowly getting more exposition, so, you know, show, if you want to give us exposition, can we get some answers? Maybe, knowing this series, they'll give us enough answers to generate 12 more questions. Because that just seems to be the run of the mill, right? That just seems to be our lot in life and where we're at with this series, but what can we do? So we are going to start Trigun, episode 17, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and show us that sweet, sweet, sweet intro. Well, you wanted answers, right? What? Oh my gosh, are you kidding? Okay, yeah, so Vash is basically an alien, maybe an angel. That's what REM says, right? REM seems under the Christian belief that Vash and knives are... My question is, why they call him them Vash and why Knives? And when you name someone Knives, did you expect them to turn out to be soft? Right? Like, why? I want to know, I'm so curious now, I want to know what Vash means. Vash is beauty, authority, will, wish, power, and divine. And it's from the Hindu, origins. And then Knives, I'm looking up there, is knife or dagger. Yeah. Claiming the meaning of an edge. I'm like, there's really no alternate meaning to Knives. Like, Vash means like divine and, has power, and Knives is like, it's literally a dagger. Like a blade. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you name him Knives? The only thing I can gather is maybe Vash and Knives were like the names of two members of the ship, and maybe they were crew members that died or something, like in the process of finding the kids. And so when they found them, they're like, oh, we'll just name them after the crew members that were lost, and their names were Vash, and their last names were Vash and Knives, and they're like, that's what we'll call them. And that's the only thing I can think of. That's all I got. And but what? So wow, we got a lot of explanation in this episode. That was the fastest episode. I was just like, I could watch a whole series just on this. Like, if you gave me 26 episodes of this, I wanted more of this. I was like, wait, what? I feel like I could watch a whole mini series of just REM and her adventures. Like, what a tease, because this show got me to really like REM's character in this one episode, and how she talks about redemption. She talks about making mistakes in the past and moving forward, and that you're always able to get better. You're not, something bad you did in the past doesn't give you a death sentence for the rest of your existence. Like, you can constantly work to become a better person. Like, her message and her philosophy was so good. She's like, if you do something bad, you can make up for it. Like, it's not the end of the world. And I loved that, because it's so true, right? I think so often we judge people by one mistake that they've made, and that doesn't define who they are. And she kind of was trying to say that, and Vash took that to heart. But Knives took it a very different way. So wow. Okay, so 107 years ago. 107 years ago. So the big question is, did the ships with the people on them, did they land on the planet and cultivate it from there? That is the question, right? So there are some questions, right? The questions I have, and then we're going to go through this episode and see if they get answered, is on the planet that we have, are the humans the descendants of the quote-unquote seeds? I think that they are, because they talked about the plants needing to be managed. And so we have on here, quote-unquote, the plants need to be managed. And then they talked about this ancient technology. Now, it could be that the humans on this planet are the descendants of the seeds on the ship, or the ancient tech was what Vash and Knives brought to the inhabitants of the planet. And maybe next episode we'll find that out. Maybe, because we ended the episode, we've got to find out what happened between Knives and Vash. Like, why did Knives and Vash split? Like, right, we have to find that out. They ended the last episode with Vash showing up being like, they framed that being like, you're gonna have to take care of Knives. And take care can either be nurture or can be take care of. And Vash is like, I've come to take care of you. But would Vash kill Knives? Would he? I don't know. It's his brother. It's his twin. Would he? I don't know. But yeah, the idea that it's either one of two things. Either when they were talking about the ships reversing thrusters, was it so they didn't crash instead that they landed on the planets? Either that happened, they landed on the planet and then inhabited it, and then it just kind of all fell to ruin after that. Or there were already humanoid people on the planet that they're on, and Vash and them took the technology from their ship and helped the people of that planet kind of cultivate, and then things went badly. Maybe. But for somehow Vash and Knives get split up. But oh my gosh, there's a bit to talk about in this episode. But the idea that they're seeds. This episode hit a lot of things on the nose. Talking about how we ruined the planet that we're on. So everybody got a hold of Jeff Bezos' money and got in the ship and took off. And it's like, well, it was starting to. And the thing about it is, late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of environmentalism in media. Like, you think of Fern Gully, you think of Land Before Time. There was a lot of focus and narratives about how we're wrecking the environment. Captain Planet. Like, there's a lot of cartoons and a lot of animated media that focused... think of Princess Mononoke. The whole theme behind Princess Mononoke is about don't mess with nature. And that was kind of a big thing in the 90s and the late 80s, was the idea of, hey, maybe we shouldn't screw up the planet. And then we didn't listen. Of course. We didn't listen to the Bat and Fern Gully telling us not to mess up things. We were happy with Tim Curry being the Guck monster, clearly. But yeah, it was a big narrative push. So I'm not surprised by the message being pushed out by this series. It was made in the 90s. This was a big theme going on in media. But man, is it relevant and topical today! That whole global warming thing is topical indeed. I was like just sitting there watching the episode going, wow, we should have maybe listened to Joey and all of them. Should have maybe listened to Joey and them and we wouldn't end up with this problem. But I do like the idea of seeds. I do like the idea that they basically split up into all these different groups and to go recolonize planets elsewhere and try to, start anew and start fresh, right? And they're like, okay, there's the command room, Project Seeds. And we get introduced to our characters, right? We have Mary, we have Rowan, we have Steve, we have Joey, we have Rem. They could have their own series. Like, it sets up something you're like, oh, we'll follow these guys around the entire episode. Well, we do, until they all die. But yeah, I just love how 90s, they look like a 90s squad. It looks like Star Trek meets Captain Planet, the way that their outfits are designed. It's very 90s. I love it. And they're like, this planet is going to be our new home. So they do end up going there, right? They do end up. So I guess maybe they all end up, maybe we'll encounter Steve again. Maybe we'll see Steve as an old man. Maybe that will be the case, right? Who knows? I mean, well, it's been 107 years. Probably not, because they're still humans. They still age right? But basically they have Project Seeds, and they found a planet, and they do like the confetti, they do the celebration, they got all their 90s gear, put it in this spaceship, and they've been on like 5 sleep cycles. So basically they've been like, it's reasonably similar to home. So yeah, we've been through cold sleep 5 times. And it kind of like, Steve's character right from the start, I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but when he gropes Mary, if you stop and pause it, not that I want to pause on him groping Mary, but when you pause it, Rowan looks very upset by that. So you have these dynamics between these characters. You have Joey, who is the leader, fitting of a character named Joey. Then you have Steve, who is the jerk. He's like Steve is the character in like every 90s action movie that does something stupid that gets the rest of the crew killed. I feel like there's a big take on Alien with this crew, because Mary looks like Sigourney Weaver from Alien, and it's like, I feel like that's not coincidence, right? So then you have Mary, who is maybe in a relationship with Steve. Maybe. If it is, it's kind of a toxic one. Then you have Rowan, who likes Mary. And then you have Rem. And Rem, she had someone she loved named Alex, but they died. They did. And she feels like Vash is very similar to him. And she describes Alex as her emotional anchor, that he got her through the rough times. And it's so funny because she ends up getting Vash through the rough times now. So it's this cycle of kindness that Rem kind of takes from Alex. It's really, really nice. But yeah, so they don't want to go back into cold sleep again. They don't like that. And yeah, he's like, knock it off, Steve. We can't settle there. It's not our decision. So they're like, it's definitely habitable, but it has no existing oceans, and its stratum is mainly quartz. Ah, so they're basically establishing that, well, this is not an ideal planet. There's not enough water, and the resources there are not good. But they go there anyway. I want to make note. We get our thing with Vash and Knives from the start. The very first image we see of the two of them show how very different they are, and it's very cool because you have Vash. We're gonna put them both here. So you have Vash and you have Knives. Vash is a very warm colored centered. His hair has a more golden color to it. His eyes are more lush. They're more green. They're just like a warmer tone. And you have Knives, who has cold blue eyes and like very platinum blonde hair. He's very cool tones, right? Which is interesting. And then the way that they are from the start, Vash is very much the clown. He has the clown mask on. He has the hat on. He's getting ready to pop 3 poppers. His personality is very much like what we've seen Vashes be in the actual show. Knives is serious. You have someone that's a clown and it's warm, and someone that is a cold, serious person. Like Knives is just holding the hat like, I don't really want to party with you all. I don't want to celebrate. It's from the very opening scene of them. It sets the stage, right? It sets the stage for how they are. And they're like, what kind of flowers are on the planet? And Joey's like, oh, well. He's like, weren't you listening, Rem? The planet isn't happy. He's like, oh, why not? He's like, we have time. Let's wait until the minute analysis results are in. It might just have flowers. And Rem says, I hope they're red. Yeah, she wants red flowers. So she like wants like roses. I have like Shenandoah, like 24 roses stuck in my head for that. So we go to the cold sleep control room, and there is Knives, right? Or is it Vash? Yeah, he says, where's Knives? So Vash is looking at all the people in storage, and he says, Rem. And he's like, why don't they ever wake up? It's funny because one of them kind of looks like Masato from Neon Genesis in the tubes. The ship is too quiet. It's just you and us. That only makes and even the others only make 7. So there's the 5. Yeah, there's only 7 of them on the ship, which is a very like alien scenario, very Among Us, very much like, oh, there's only so many of us on the ship that are controlling everything, and we just like go off and on. And she says, Vash, I'll tell you what's written on the outside of the ship. And she explains the thing about Project Seeds, the human race built to carry our genes into an unknown world. She says, if there is a God deep in space, he might laugh at our pitiful struggle for immortality. So I like that. I like that she acknowledges, she's like, this may all be just, futile irony, and God may be like, no, you're not going to do this. You can't spread to the other parts of the galaxy. But she seems like very determined in her faith. She's like, it may look shameful, but this is the desperate will to survive. And it's kind of interesting because this ship is vast, and there's so many ships that are just like it. And so it's her kind of explaining to Vash that this seems like a lot, because it is, but humans are desperate for survival, and they will do anything to live. And she's like, this is just our will. It's what else can I say? A struggle on new land waits for them. Our job is to let them sleep in peace until then. And he's like, well, can we help? Yeah, and the moment he says, can we help? It's like it should have sank in that they're not among the humans. They are different. There's something else. What they are, we still don't know. Are they angels like she say, or are they just another alien race? And that's when Knives shows up. Shall we have lunch in the usual place? He speaks very formally, right? And we go to this simulation room where it's just very beautiful, and there's butterflies and all of this. And so Knives is there with the cup, and Vash is eating the sandwiches, which is funny. And they're like, you must like the song. She says, it pops in my head whenever I'm happy. And he says, it's a nice song. And that's when Knives says, he looks down at the drink. He says, this is the same drink, but it tastes different here. Like it's alive. Because everything's happy, right? And she says that our world was more like, had much more variety in life. So what's interesting is they go to the briefing room, and Knives and Vash are allowed to be with Joey and with REM. So that's kind of cool, the idea that they're extremely intelligent. We established that they have very high, both of them have high IQs. That they're smarter than most humans. And they also grow, we'll put this on here, they grow up fast. Like in a year's time, in 1 year, they aged like 14 years. So the question, of course, is why do they stop and stay hot? I'm like, wait a minute. Why do they grow like 14 years in 1 human year, but then 107 years later, when they should be like, 600 by the standards of whatever species they are they still hot, right? Maybe their species lives for like thousands of years. We don't know. That does make the Meryl and Vash ship a little weird, because Vash is at this point 108 years old. 108 years old because they were a year old when the whole incident went down. So he's like 108 years old, and Meryl's like, what, 20 something? But after you're an adult, age is just a number. She's old enough to make her own decisions. Don't judge them. Oh my God. So like the state of our home Earth has become too dire to support mankind. And this is where Joey goes on like the rampage and the monologue about how things were really bad and Project Seeds was drafted as a way to resolve the crisis. And I like that Vash is like, that's the ship we're on. And Knives is like, you simpleton. And then, yeah, what's funny is that Vash is like, we're on the ship. Like, he's just so enamored by everything. And Knives cuts straight to the core. And Knives' thing is he talks about how humanity destroyed themselves. The moment he starts talking about that, I was like, oh no. Because Knives' whole thing is that he determines that humanity is like a disease. He's like, humanity is the problem. They are germs. Like he tells Vash, he's like, they are germs. They're a sickness and they'll just spread throughout the galaxy and we can't have that happening. And I'm like, no. He's like, I see a problem. We need to cut out the root of the problem. Whereas Vash is like, they just seem like they're dandy and neat. It's a very different reaction. And Joey is like, I'm afraid so. Yeah, we did damage it. Our young race believed the land and resources were unlimited. And I'm sitting over here like, we're having that same problem now. Funny you say that. But I like that he says our young race. Like he's like, it's almost as if he's implying that they are suspect that Vash and Knives come from a much more ancient race. And he's like, oh, forgive us. We're in our adolescence. We did not know what we were doing. We were having like a raging 20s. Like, you know how you are when you're in your 20s, right? And just trying to say like, those were mistakes of the past. And that's when he's like, by the time we realized the follies of our ways, it was too late. And then Vash says, well, if that's true, then why did you set this project in motion? And I like that Knives the whole time is doing this. Like he's contemplating, and Vash is just kind of like this. Very, very, very different mannerisms. Like even the ways that they sit, the way that they use their hands, they're so different, and they imply so much about their body language. He says, we're clinging to life until the verge of death is intrinsic behavior of all organisms. So he's like, well, we did this project because otherwise we'd die. Like every organism at their foundation has the will to survive, right? Is it all right to live? And that's when the question is asked, is it all right to live even if other things must die? And they say we make the smallest sacrifice possible at the given time. So Joey says, yes, we understand we're making a sacrifice, but he's saying that we only sacrifice if needed, and it's the smallest possible. He's like, we're not going to go on a rampage killing everybody, Knives. But if worse comes to worse and you have to do something, then we are going to stand up and survive. It's a last resort, right? It's a last resort. Unlike Earth's other organisms, we have the ability to reason, the knowledge to minimize sacrifices. And that's where REM says we also have the ability to right our wrongs. So the idea of right our wrongs. The idea that nothing is certain. She's like, if you make a mistake, you can fix it. She's like, that's how humans are different from the other organisms on our planet. We have the power to reason, and thus we have the ability to change our fates. Mm-hmm. I love Rem's character. She's so great. She's beautiful. She's smart. She's so sweet. She's like, we're attempting to start over. And I love just the picture of the world in between. You have Knives, you have Vash, and you have Rem in the middle. And Rem, I love like her silky black hair, like the earth above her. And I love that Vash is like, oh wow, you're starting over and being a fresh start. That's great. And he seems like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And Knives is like, but are you going to start over, or are you going to make the same mistakes again? Like, it's just like there's optimism and skepticism side by side in that moment. It's so good. And because Vash and Knives are dressed the same, it creates such a contrast. As we journey, we search and think of ways to make everyone happy. And I just love the lighting. I love the lighting with the Rem and Joey afterwards, where they have the coffee, and it feels very alien. It feels very Stanley Kubrick. I love it. It's a very cool artistic choice to have it that way. But yeah, she says our goal is happiness. Okay. Easy peasy. I love Rem's character. Rem and Joey were my favorite in this episode. I loved both of them. I'm so sad that they're dead. He says, this is no good. He says, I'm not cut out to be an educator. And I kind of love this moment too, because Joey's like, I'm not meant to like teach people. He's like, no, that's not we don't exactly know what Joey did in the past, but he's like, I'm not an educator. And Rem's like, well, I'm not either. I'm just babysitting and trying to teach them, right from wrong and to be a good person. And again, we've talked about plants and seeds this whole time. And there's like all these like plants growing behind them. She's like, I'm feeding them. He says, I'm feeding them information from a computer. I've never been a father. I love that. The idea of feeding them, giving them information. There's a big correlation there too, because you have Joey, who talks about like the food, which is knowledge. And you have Rem, who's talking about Eden, which is this paradise, right? And her wanting to make everyone happy and create this paradise. And it seems like for Rem, she reaches Vash. Vash wants to create the paradise as well. He's like, yeah, I want people to be happy too. But then you have Knives, who gains the knowledge, because it shows when he cuts his hair, he's like he's bitten a piece of the fruit off the tree. He's taken a bite out of the apple. He's gained the forbidden knowledge, and he's realized that humans suck. He's like, oh no, these people have got to go. So it's funny because Vash becomes kind of, he wants to live out Rem's dream of paradise and Eden. And Joey talks about giving them the food and the knowledge, but it's like that knowledge destroyed the Garden of Eden. And Knives literally took the knowledge and destroyed the Eden that Rem had created for Vash and the others. It's like, oh my God, just the symbolism. And it's so good. It's like, it's subtle enough. Like, it's right there in front of you, but it's subtle enough. I love it. And she talks about how, she's just taking care of them. She's like, I just play with them. That's all. I'm not that great. And he says, no. There's a difference between our characters, right? I love the lighting of it. He's like, why do you suppose they came here? And she's like, because they're angels. I want to know what they are, but I think that's part of the fun, is that we don't know what Vash and Knives are. Are they angels? Were they sent here? What kind of species are they? She's like, they're angels. And I love her being like, these two are angels God sent us to point us in the right direction. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I just love that she has this faith, and I think that she herself knows that's probably not the case, but she's just musing because she's like, who knows what the answer is? We don't, so why not muse at something as fantastical as this? Why not say that? Who's stopping us? But yeah, I like the ship designs. They kind of look like they have mushrooms growing out of them. They're kind of cool. And then we have Steve, who comes back in, and he asks where Rem is. And Rowan says she's babysitting the kids. And they're like, playing chess against one another. And if you notice on the chessboard, Knives is the black pieces and Vash is in control of the white pieces. I mean, so I'm guessing in the OP now, the one with the gun pointed is Knives, pointing it back at Vash. Oh my god. Ah! So yeah, like there isn't a care. We still have 3 plants to adjust. Yeah, we don't exactly know. I'm assuming at this point the plants are what end up being on the planet that they end up inhabiting. The question is, were the humans on that planet there already, or are they humans from the ships? Which we're not quite there yet. I want to check when we get there. They took care of those while you were napping. And he's like, you're kidding. That would have taken me 2 whole days. But they're smart enough that they can do it. And honestly, Mary and Rowan seem to take it as, oh, well, these guys are just little alien kids, but they're super smart, so we could put them to work. Ha ha ha. Child labor, am I right? But Steve, for all the mistakes Steve makes, he does bring up a really good point, being like, I don't like that he calls them monsters, because it's like that fear of the unknown, right? But he does bring up a pretty good point, where he says, we don't know who they are and what they can do. Like that is the one thing. Like there's a part that I don't like where Steve automatically judges them, calls them monsters, and completely rules them as something that shouldn't be there without getting to know them. But he does bring up a good point. He's like, we took them in as babies. We don't know what's gonna happen. And he's like, if you start using him without knowing what you're doing, you might end up getting us hurt. He's like, if you think these kids are just going to play around and it's going to be okay, he's like, what if an accident happens? He's like, that's not going to be good. But he says, look how big they grew in 1 year. I love that shot where it's just his eyeball being like, these kids are monsters, I tell you. Like, he just looks so paranoid, right? And I love that they play on the idea of cabin fever and being stuck on the ship and the claustrophobia. I love that we see Vash like an anti-gravity, chamber like floating around, and then Knives comes in and he like floats to him. And he's like, Vash. And he's like, you're crying again. And he says, Steve, he says that we're not human. Yeah, but then there's the thing. Knives is the one that sees him later. So can Vash and Knives hear telepathically? Knives is the one that sees Steve later, not Vash. So he's clearly heard the same thing from Steve. And Steve has the club like he's beaten him. To these people, we're just uninvited guests. We need to be patient until they accept us. But REM said that we could stay here. He said, do you remember what Joey said? We have to make the smallest sacrifice possible at the given time. And the crazy thing is that they're growing so fast that it seems like Knives like processes and makes these decisions very quickly. But if his mind is developing at the rate that it is, if 14 years pass in 1 year, then a month is like literally a year. So his mind is processing things at a faster pace. But I do think it's worthy to point out that Knives is the one that is abused by Steve. Knives gets beaten by Steve, but he tells Vash about the smallest sacrifice and tries to make him feel better. Because Vash is all sad and Knives is like, you're my brother, I want you to feel better, so don't let what that guy said get to you. But Knives is the one that got beat, so I think that's going to make an impact later on. And then, of course, we see the apple, the Garden of Eden, in between the two of them. It's so great. Why the plants can't talk. Which is interesting. REM says it's because they're strong. She says because they're strong, they don't need to talk. She says they're so strong they only think of living and they don't need words. Which is kind of an interesting way to put it, because it's the idea of when you are strong, you just live and you don't need to explain anything. It's kind of like I'm watching Jujutsu Kaisen at the same time, and there's a character in Jujutsu Kaisen that is basically OP. If you've watched the show for 5 seconds, you know who I'm talking about. But in that series, there's a character who's pretty much very overpowered. They're like the strongest character in the show. And they get to this like point of enlightenment where they're so strong, they don't need to explain themselves. They don't need to explain why they do anything any of their actions. They just do, and they're like, I'm fine. And I feel like that's like the explanation of the plants. When they're strong enough, they don't need to explain with words. They exist, and that's enough. I find that interesting. It's also interesting that they talk to plants, or they want to know why these plants can't speak. So it makes me wonder if they're in tune or connected with the spiritual elements of the world around them. Because again, Vash talks to the computers as we go. So maybe they are in tune with the phenomena that are around them. And he says, we eat their fruit to live. And so he says, do you think I'll be eaten too someday? I was like, well, this is an Attack on Titan, so probably not. Probably not Knives. But there is something fascinating about that where he says, what's interesting is there's this conversation about the strong. Like she says the plants are so strong, they don't need to speak. But then Vash is like, yeah, and people eat them to survive. So there's this idea of the strong getting preyed upon by the weak and taken over by the weak to sustain themselves. There's something to that. And we see that in a lot of shows, right? This concept of the strong protecting the weak to survive. And again, if you've watched Jujutsu Kaisen, that's a theme in that show too. The idea of those that are strong are often in charge of protecting the weak. And it's the weak's world to inherit. The meek shall inherit the earth. It's the weak people's world to inherit. And I feel like Vash is like, well, yeah, we can all live in it together and be happy. And Knives is like, no, I don't think so. I think Knives is like, no, I want only the strong to survive. I don't want to protect the weak. They're germs. You could make comparisons to lots of characters and lots of shows with that, but it's so interesting. And Vash is like, you won't. Rem said so, remember? She said they're making a different kind of Eden. And he's like, what are you doing there? And then he grabs. He like grabs at the knowledge, grabs at the fruit. And Vash is like, you're not going to get eaten because this is going to be different than back then. And Knives is like, I don't think it's going to be different. So then, yeah, we see this place is off limits. Now, who is the one that gets kicked? It's Knives that gets kicked. Yes, and that's when the apple, why am I here? So this is the problem. Knives is the one that gets abused, right? Knives is the one that gets injured. Steve is the one that multiple times abuses Knives. And Knives questions, why am I here? It's definitely a nurturing. It's a nature and nurture situation, but you have Rem who nurtured Vash to become this peace-loving person and who wasn't abused like Knives, who equally smart develops this much more cynical view of humanity because Vash only sees like the positives of humanity and Knives sees them at their worst. And so it's this really cool idea of if you view someone at their best, you think really highly of them, but when you view them at their worst, suddenly your opinions drastically change. And so Knives and Vash have developed these very different understandings of humanity. So we see them as babies, right? With these umbilical cords. Like babies, umbilical cords. They're there, and we see them we see everybody in these suits on the ship. We see Joey there. And then Rem is like, don't shoot them. And they're these babies, but where do they come from? What are they attached to? She says, don't shoot them. Why did we come here? And then the apple falls. So yeah, Knives is having this, existential crisis at 1 year old where he's like, why am I here? Why did we come? We don't know where those umbilical cords are. They coming from the ship? Are they connected to the plants themselves? We don't know yet. But he's like, why did we come here? And what's the purpose for us? And she says, it won't be much longer. I'm going to give you a haircut. And he says, take your time. And so she cuts the hair, right? And I just love he has the bowl cut. She's like, your hair is almost curly. And then she talks about, putting it up like Alex. She says it looks a lot like his, and she makes his hair. That's why Vash keeps his hair like that, because it's like how Rem liked it. And he asks where the one she loved is, and she says in the land of angels in heaven. He was my emotional support. And she's like, thanks to him, I was able to move on and get on the ship and get back in the right direction. And Vash asks if she's sad, and she says just a little bit. And he's like, well, you have me, and I won't leave you alone. And he says, I promise because I love you. And it's so sweet. Like it's just pure innocent. It's like, it's the most platonic, pure, innocent love where he's just, I love you. And she's like, oh, well, that's so sweet. I says, you're such a baby. And I love that she pokes him. She's like, but thank you. And she asks for them to switch, but he's gone. And then we see him like going Akashi, got the scissors, and is just sitting there he already bit the apple and he's just slicing the hair off himself with the black scissors. Couldn't get much more symbolic, right? Just cutting it, and he like runs his hair through it. It's all wrong. And we see the butterflies. And what he's looking at are these butterflies beneath the case, right? Which is so fascinating because of a few things, right? So one, we established that butterflies are basically like Vash and Knives. The butterflies are like Vash and Knives, and the spiders are humans. It's kind of how we establish it, right? Because later on he kills the spider. But then you have, literally in the glass case, you have the butterflies, except one is missing, and there is Knives' head where the missing butterfly is. So it's the idea of pinning the butterflies under the glass, like trapping them there just for looks, right? Just to observe, right? And his hair kind of looks like the wings of a moth or a butterfly. And it's even more funny because on top of that, you have the humans in the sleep pods, which are kind of like butterflies under glass too, because there's a lot of different ways you can analyze it. But a part of me wondered if he says it's all wrong. And so part of me wonders if he's mad that Vash has developed these feelings for Rem, like he cares for her, and Knives is kind of like, no, it's supposed to be us two and them, not you and Rem and us. Like maybe he's mad and jealous that Vash has found somebody he cares about, and Knives just can't relate. Because then Vash comes in and he's like, oh, I knew you'd be here. And then we see, him just sitting there. He's like, what happened? He's like, it was a small change of heart. And like the scissors are poking through the apple. Like he just stabbed the apple with the scissors. He says, it's a small change of heart. If we stay the same, we'll have no individuality. Red flag. That would have been red flag number 1. But yeah, he's like, I don't want to be like you. And so Knives is like, I don't understand humans and I don't like them like you do. So I can't be like you for the rest of my days. He's like, it's not fair. And then we have that, right? So they're like, oh, well, they like the haircut. And of course, we get like the idea, you get the visual like physicality of Steve doesn't want to sit with them. He's not happy with Knives and Vash. He doesn't like what's happening. And we know by now that Steve has been abusing Knives for some time. Knives hasn't told anybody about the abuse. So he probably feels this like, kind of maybe pseudo guilt, maybe like paranoia that Knives is going to say something and get him in trouble, because I think Joey would not be happy about it. And so Knives is just like, oh yeah, I feel refreshed. And they're like, you look very intellectual, like a little philosopher. Which is going to be interesting. I can picture Knives as a villain doing all these philosophical rants. And Vash is just like, shut up. And he's like, what do I look like? A mama's boy. And that's when Steve gets mad. And he's like, I'm amazed you can share your table with those monsters. They all have like pendants or pins that are tied to something. They all share the same pendant or pin. It's interesting. And then, yeah, of course, Knives like coldly looks at Steve with the monsters line. And Vash is like, why would he call us monsters? Like, it's so interesting. And they're like, Steve, you've had one too many. And he's like, no, I haven't. And Rowan's like, don't you still have work to do? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Steve's kind of a jerk, and he's not cool at all. And that's when Knives says, "Is that how a grown man behaves in front of children?" And Steve gets mad about that and leaves. Mm-hmm. Which I was waiting for him to blow up after Knives says that, but he gets mad and walks away. Yeah. Acting all kooky. Yeah. Rim's like, what the hell is happening? He's acted crazy recently. And he says, that's when Knives says he's afraid. As he calmly sips the cocoa! I'm like, oh my god. Knives is terrifying. This little kid. Yep. So then I want to go back to this. He says, who does he think he is, draping himself all over Mary? Ah, Rowan. So Rowan likes Mary, and he gets mad because Steve's like assaulting her. And that's what it was. See, in the episode I was like, what's the deal with Steve in there? But Knives goes in and convinces Rowan he plants the seed to frame Steve. That's what it is. He plants a seed with Rowan which is funny, plant the seed, the ship of seeds. And then we cut back to Mary, and there's like the ashtray full of cigarette butts. There's like all these baguettes with knives through it, and the coffee and the doilies. She's like, those two are such a drag. But then just one would be boring. And then we see Knives. And she's like, oh. And that's it. Really? So when she said one would be, but just one would be boring, she's talking about Steve and Rowan. Meanwhile, Vash and Knives are with REM, and we have the spider and the web. And then we have the big debate of what to do. The philosophical debate of how do we solve this problem. And Vash's solution, this is such a representation of the whole entire thing. Vash wants to save both the spider and the butterfly. He wants to save them both and give them both an equal chance. But Knives kills the predator. He kills the predator to save the prey. Which is interesting because that's kind of going back to the strong. It's like instead of the strong protecting the weak, it's the strong killing the strong so the weak can survive. But he gets close, and that's when, like, so easily he makes that choice. He said, this is easier. And Vash is like, he said, you wanted to save the butterfly, didn't you? And Vash is like, but I wanted to save both of them. And then here's the debate. Knives is like, well, what are you talking about? Spiders need to catch butterflies or they die of starvation. And I'm like, well, they can catch other things, though. They can catch other bugs. It doesn't have to be butterflies. But the point is, he's like, well, but they're going to have to kill the butterflies to live. You can't save both. Eventually, one is going to die, the spider or the butterfly. He's like, don't you even know that? You can't make that. And that's when Rim says, that may be, but you can't make that choice so easily. She's like, you shouldn't do that. She's like, you both have life. So you should. And he says, but I'm not wrong. If you keep saving butterflies, the spiders will die. And that is true. The thing about it is that Knives isn't wrong technically. He's not technically wrong. If you keep saving the butterflies, yes, the spiders will starve. But Rim is saying that may be, but it's not up for you to decide. It's nature. So that's the thing, is that in both situations, sometimes you leave it to nature. It's saying that Vash may have been wrong for trying to interfere. It's the idea of interference, right? Vash wanted to save them both, and she's saying we shouldn't just interfere so easily. We should let things happen naturally, and wanting to save both is a contradiction. What would you rather do? Keep deliberating? And I was like, oh my God, Knives! She's like, whoa, kid! Whoa, I like practically raised you. You know? She's like, it's not, this isn't the butterfly will be eaten in the meantime. And that's when Vash tackles him. He's like, if we deliberate, then the butterfly's going to die. You could apply that whole conversation of the butterfly and the spider. You could apply it to Attack on Titan. You could apply it to Vinland Saga. You could apply that entire conversation, like half the shows I'm watching right now, of the idea of, do you save the butterfly or do you save the spider? You could apply it to Heaven Official's Blessing. You could apply it to a lot of things. But it's the idea of interference, and do you interfere or not? When is it okay to interfere? And the idea of you should not choose so easily to take life away, because that's the worst decision. Like, saving the spider or saving the butterfly may cause problems, but you should not make those choices without deeply thinking about them. And Knives is saying, if we deeply think about them, there'll be nothing left. So, and I love that Vash is just like, what's wrong with that? And then I love that Knives does get worked up. Like, Knives does get a little bit fearful when Vash tackles him. And Vash tackles him. So Vash may end up being the stronger of the two physically, but Knives is more cunning. So I just, ooh. But the look on Knives' face where he just seems like he's sincere. He's like, I want to save both of them. And Knives does look like he has that pitiful look on his face, like he's, sorry that he made his brother mad. And Rem's like, well, shit, I didn't ask for this. And he lets him go. And I love that we have both of them leaning away from one another. They clearly have two totally different ideologies, where Vash wants to be the one to be the savior for them and be the hero, and Knives is like, let's think about this pragmatically. And he has a very different approach. I love it. I love how it's framed. And then the butterfly flies between them, right? These two, they're almost like deities, right? These angels. Mm-hmm. And he says, you make no sense, Vash. And he leaves. He's like, well, you're the one that makes no sense. And Rem's like, this is complicated. Yeah. I love it between the two of them. And so then they relieve Steve of his duty, put him in a straight jacket and detain him in the freezer. And Knives is happy about this from framing him. And Vash is like, what the hell? And what I like about it is Rem's like, wait a minute, we should talk more about this and hear his side of the story. Because that goes with Rem's character. She's like, we shouldn't judge him. I mean, you could say Rem's far too forgiving. You could definitely say that. But I like that she, from her own experience, she knows what it's like to be judged for a crime, seemingly, or for doing wrong in the past. And she's like, well, why don't we hear his side of the story? And Joey's like, no, we need to act now. And then he's put in the deep freeze. And she's like, if you make mistakes, it's always possible to fix them. And she keeps telling Vash that. Then if you turn around, you'll see the future. I love that she talks to all these things to Vash, but again, Knives isn't there to hear the conversation. And we see the flower under the glass. I love it. So then we find out that Rowan was like tricked into like asking her out, and she says no, and he just freaking shoots her. He kills Mary. I was like, oh my God, no. Like, Rowan completely cracks, and then he blames Knives, and then it all goes downhill. And I thought that Rem was gonna get shot. I thought she died from getting shot by Rowan, but that is not what happens. She had that faith that he wasn't going to shoot her. He just had a moment, and she would have been a great cop. She talked him down. She was going to get the gun, and then Joey was like, I don't want to risk losing you, and he opens the hatch up and sucks them both out. I mean, do the physics work? No, but we'd let it go. But yeah, it sucks. And she's like, I would have had the gun. And Joey's like, but you don't know that for sure. He's like, and I didn't want to risk you getting killed. Meanwhile, Knives, he's like, maybe Rem is right. And he said, you're just a human like the rest of them. I'm making the right choice. Oh my God. Yeah, so Knives decides the humans are not worth saving. He says they're not. He's like, I'm a spider. He becomes a spider. I say they were butterflies, and Knives becomes the spider. He's like, you guys are not worth saving, and I'm not going to be caught up in your web. I'm going to just go ahead and get you out of the way. And so, yeah, he tampers with everything. And we have Project Seeds. Tampers with the whole boat. It shows them going to the planet. He says altering the ship's course, where they're going straight down to the planet. Yep, Seeds S. Yeah, the course has been replotted. Someone is sending order to all of the ships, and the locks have entered autolock mode. They're gonna crash on the planet. Yep. And so the ships that are underneath the Earth, yeah, so they do land on Earth, and there are the plants, everything there, they do land. So the question is, what do we do? So the plants that they found back when Wolfwood was there are one of the ones that crash landed on the planet. Okay, and over 100 years they were buried by the dunes and all of this. So the question is, what happened to the humans that were on the ship? Did they all die, or did they become the ones that populated the planet? We guess so. So that also leads to believe of Legato and Wolfwood and the others, the ones that have the special abilities. They don't seem like they're the same type of, I'm just going to say angels because that's what REM calls them, angels, as Vash and Knives. So are they just humans that have special abilities? Are they just humans that are stronger than other humans, and that's the deal? Are they humans that have been given special technology by Knives? I'm wanting to say the guy in Vash's flashback now in July was Knives, not Legato. He just has hair cut short. Oh my god. So yeah, I still have so many questions, and I hope the next episode is going to give us answers to it. And so they tell everybody to escape to the escape pods. I love Rem's like spacesuit, the blue. And she's like, give me strength, Alex. And she decides, I can't leave Joey here by himself. I want to try to save everyone. She wants to try to reroute the ships. The program's running. And that's when Rem, she says, if Alex were alive, he would have done the same thing. So she's going to try to save all the other people on the ships. Take care of Knives. Oh, that line, take care of him. Oh my god. And I feel so bad. And she says something to him. She says something to Vash. She says something to Vash. What does she say? She said something as she was like crying and the door shut. And that's when he sees like the ship blow up. And I'm guessing that she managed to save them all right before the ship blew up. And we see them in the spacesuits with the red. Yeah, wow. Humans are incomprehensible. They throw down their lives for foolish sentimentalism. And Vash is like, what? He's like, I was going to let her live because you become so attached to her. But she was imperfect. You were better off without her. Like, Knives is, oof. Oof, that line about being imperfect. And he's like, Knives. He's like hell, I'd let them immigrate. That would be like spreading germs across our healthy universe. Oh my god. Yeah. And then Vash is like, did you really do this? He says the plant ship will survive. We need to create our new home after all. So the plant ship is going to make it, the one with the plants on it. Okay, supposedly. And he says, we're going to repopulate the planet. And Vash is like, what the hell? Only the ships carrying the humans will crash. And then Vash gets really sad and like goes after Knives. So the ship with the plants on it, which I'm assuming is the plants they're talking about on the planet now. He says the humans aren't going to make it, just the technology that they need. And Knives looks terrifying. He looks very scary. And then they have a correction. And he says, what? And then they all reverse thrusters. Yeah. She got me. Oh, poor Vash Rim. And so then we see all the ships going down into the planet. Yep. So they all, and the red flowers. So yeah, all the people basically on this planet right now are humans, we think, from the people that landed on the ship 107 years ago. You know, maybe. And then, yep, the flowers. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 7 flowers. And he sees her. And she's like holding Vash's hand. Take care of Knives. And we cut to Vash holding the gun. 107 years later in July City. Wow. Oh, I know, Rem. Oh, I will. Oh, and he has a black gun and that gun. Oh, okay, so I was 100. Oh, so it's been more than 107 years. Oh, so 107 years ago was in July. Was at July City where the whole incident goes down, where the city blows up. Uh-huh. And he has two guns there. He has the one gun and then he has the black gun that we see, the two guns in the OP. Oh, so since then it's been like 17 years. So it's like been, 130 years. It's fine. So I'm hoping we find out in the next episode what happens in July City, how that goes. It'd be great if we knew. Hoping we find that out. Yes, but we got so many episodes, so many answers in this episode, and I've talked for literally an hour about this series. So excited, so excited. Knives is terrifying, and we have lots of philosophical things going on, and I hope the next episode we get even more answers as we go into this third arc. I like the idea that we're getting finally the exposition before we enter the final act, right? Because Vash, after the whole deal of what just happened in episode 16, Vash is going to go look for knives. Like Legato and knives. What do we do, y'all? What do we do? So I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction discussion. I'm super curious to know your thoughts down below. But in the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And I'll be back very soon with more Trigun.